So, Jez, thanks for joining me today. As you know, on an N of one, you and I spend the majority of our time looking at large populations of people, right? We're looking at those trends that affect all humans. But there's a ton to get from an individual person's story. And so I'm so excited today to sit down and walk through yours because you've had such a great and fascinating career over time. Uh, a lot of behavioral scientists, because of the nature of things, are a bit younger than you and I are. So
Yeah.
it's nice to talk to people who came about sort of before behavioral science. So I want to go all the way back to
Okay.
like young Jez, like
Okay.
8, 9. What did you think if I'd said, "What are you going to be in the world?" to the young Master Groom? What would he have said?
Um, I think a scientist of sorts. Um, and I think I thought I could be an artist, but I sort of found out that the standards was far higher than I could deliver. But I did like art, so I've always felt, quite creative. But I think like the fidelity of my design to be a behavioral designer like all the time. But yeah, I'm still a protege, a behavioral designer, and but yeah, I think science. So I did really like the sciences, biology, chemistry. I wasn't particularly that good at maths. I was good at maths, but not that good. So yeah, definitely kind of a scientist, and but yeah, always a wannabe artist, I think.
I mean, and you've ended up in sort of a nice intersection of the two places. So maybe it
I
all
think
works
so.
out for young.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I mean, obviously, if you get into, yeah, I suppose, yeah, I did study science at a good level, and I did try to get into science, but then thought actually it would be good to get into more creative environments. But yeah, I mean, I'm happy to share whatever part of my life story you think would be relevant. But yeah,
No,
certainly that's happened.
it's all relevant. So you were one of the young scientists. You thought, hey, bio is a place to go, and that is where you ended up going to uni, right? It was in a
Right, right.
biochem sort of sense. Did you
Yeah.
take did you take any psych while you were there? Like, was this on the radar at all?
Um, No, not really. So I think it wasn't in my family. I had medics and teachers, general practitioners, teachers. So yeah, so I've heard from previous kind of guests that yeah they've had sort of psychology in the family, and yeah I didn't really have that. I had I was very, very fortunate. I had a really happy childhood, and had there's not a lot of money around, and but I had like a lot of brothers and sisters, and it was a very happy time in the '70s, as you said. We go maybe a bit way back, but it was a great decade to be a child. There was it was good. Uh, yeah, I really like biology and chemistry, not psychology. And I think if it had been an option on the academic curriculum, because it's not that kind of present in the UK until about 18. So occasionally it features when you're 16, or sort of 14 to 16, but it tends to be kind of like an 18-year-old. So yeah, no, not really. And but I think I've heard you speak to previous guests about. I think it's a biology as a behavioral science, but I think I really really did enjoy. I kind of like the molecular biology and DNA, and myself and Rory, we'll get onto it later, when we worked at Ogilvy together. We used to talk about like behavioral science. Often it's these kind of like micro kind of elements of substrate in like the complexity of life that can massively change people's behavior at scale with lots and lots of people, and that's what fascinated us about kind of the early machinations of nudge. And yeah, I think it's true of biology. You get these micro traces of really, really important elements, and if they're not there or they're incorrectly formed, then it has huge, huge effects on people and animals and plants, etc. So really, really enjoyed that. Really enjoy DNA, DNA, RNA, tRNA, but to be honest, Matt, I was really messy in the laboratory. Like I had a really good I had a really good partner, and she was brilliant in the laboratory, so she got me through my university career. But I was a good theoretical biochemist, I think, and yeah, I really enjoyed like the creativity of the biochemistry. Like, you know, when people don't really understand, I don't think, like genetics, or, you know, certainly with like vaccination and the pandemic, about, you know, different vaccines work in different ways, and just like, I don't think people really understand like that with micro details. And I really enjoyed and reveled in like the randomness and the creativity of biology, and how it produces diversity, how it allows kind of things to thrive, how people have this misconception that survival of the fittest is always about the strongest or the fastest or the tallest, and, you know, it couldn't be anything more from the truth. You know, it's about diversity and particular, you know, features that allow you to thrive. So I really enjoyed that. Yeah, and you know, it took me to 21, but then I realized that, you know, like solo work in a laboratory, that in an environment I wasn't particularly thriving myself, wasn't the right thing to do. So I did really struggle to think about, well, what could be what I wanted to do. And it took about a year where I really had a kind of an administrative job in an office. It was before computers. I was like filing and photocopying for a year, you know, with a good degree, but and parents were getting quite frustrated, as they do, that I didn't know what to do. And then I thought quite hard about that blend, I think, of creativity and science. And then I had a curiosity for advertising, and advertising then, I guess, you know, it'd been through a few different evolutions, and but it was still quite analog. It was still kind of, you know, big film, you know, stories in film, and big posters and good long copy ads, a little bit of radio, a little bit of cinema. You know, the internet didn't exist, and so it was really good time. So, and I was really fortunate that I kind of started in a small agency, and then I had an opportunity to go and work at an agency called Bartle Hegarty, which I didn't know at the time, but I was there in that like magical number of 150 people. You know, that N equals 150, magical number for an organization. Everyone knows each other, really strong connections, and it was highly creative. And we were, you know, I was most probably like 23 then, and you know, we were interacting with like Bartle, Bogle and Hegarty, you know, for better, for worse. You know, Nigel Bogle was quite scary, but amazing. John Hegarty and John Bartle were a little bit more friendly. But like, these were the best, like some of the best people have ever worked in advertising in history. And I just didn't know it at the time. And I think we respected them. And we were reverent. Definitely they had reverence, but they were very focused on the work and the product and the quality of the work and why. So I think that was when it really opened my eyes. And there was lots of other amazing people in there, and I think that was it. That was kind of like understanding emotional, rational benefits that get people to do things that they and you want them to do in really highly creative ways, but having that psychology. So, and that was it. You know,
That was where you
and
fell in
advertising
love.
was different. Yeah, that was when, you know, just thinking about how people do things. And I was chatting to some of our kind of, we've got two people on work experience at Cowrie, and I was just explaining to them kind of some of the ideas that we had that weren't rooted in like behavioral science or psychological theory, but they were interested in kind of like person to person interaction. So, for example, I remember we launched a Levi's ad. This is like Levi's 501s when they were at their height. Like, they were really cool. Like, it's hard to imagine sometimes, but they were really cool. And we kind of had this idea, which was, if we're going to launch these ads, and the creatives had come up with two different types of ad. One was it's called Drugstore, and one featured it was a guy in sort of Midwest America who was going into like a, I think it was early 1900s drugstore, going to get like a condom. And then there was the same version of the ad, but it had a female getting the condom. So what we did was we kind of launched the ad in a very sort of like creative way, which was, normally when you launch things, obviously it's big and, you know, it's huge and it's everywhere. And this was the entirely opposite. It was kind of seeding the ad, you know, with, I guess, early day influencers. So it's kind of like late night television for like young people who are really, and not actually showing the ad that much, but showing two different versions of the ad at different times. And kind of our thinking was, you know, we need to get to what would now be called influencers, but the cool people, and get them to have a conversation about the ad and how great it was. but promote that conversation with two different elements of creativity. So going, I really like that drugstore where the guy goes in, someone says no, it's where the girl goes in, and you have this conversation, and then just let that conversation sort of foster. And that the clients then were, they were really, really up for doing those types of things like live experimentation. And with multi-million pounds, as it started to grow, then we'd start to show the ad in different places. And that was really, really exciting, I think, to get into kind of like real world application of trying to create conversations around interesting things. So I guess we were kind of doing it then. And I mean, I don't think it wasn't strictly behavioral science or particularly strong psych, but it was kind of definitely I think creative kind of understanding of humans and how they interact. And I don't get frustrated. I'm kind of part of, and I do hear people say, I've been doing behavioral science forever, since I was 8, because I've always had a curiosity with human condition. Or I've been doing it when I was an accountant because there was behavioral science in the 1974 in like this accounting software, whatever it might be. I don't sort of subscribe to that. And like, obviously, you're a journeyman, journey person self. And I've actually loved about how, people have really kind of, sort of mothballed and snowballed sort of all this. And I mean, I listened to them. I think it was they thought we were ridiculous sort of podcast with Kurt and Tim, Behavioural Grooves, and Andy Luttrell. I really enjoyed like the history of behavioral economics when Thaler and Kammerer and Kahneman and Tversky are all kicking stuff around in this random place in America for about 20 years, and I didn't know about that, and I really enjoyed that. I could, and those sort of things, and I think those guys were definitely in at the. And then obviously we were very fortunate to pick it up and run with it, and sort of take it on. But yeah, so yes, I think advertising creativity, great, yeah.
And when you were at BBH. And so you're doing something radically different here, right? This is not, to your point, the traditional way of doing it. We're doing it small. We have 2 different versions of this ad.
Yeah.
Did other people look at you like you were crazy, right? I mean, you talk about Kahneman and Tversky and other people who other economists were looking at and going, you guys are just bonkers. This is not the way this is done.
Yeah. I mean, I think again, obviously I've followed you, throughout my behavioral science career, and yeah, it's kind of like, I've really reveled in that environment. So, we'd be saying things like, why don't we just have, again, I was chatting to the work experience guys, let's just take the branding off the ads. Like, let's not have Levi's on there. Like, we did some print work one time and it was beautifully shot and it was really cool. And a lot of the subculture underground magazines, they were very resistant to advertising because they didn't want to compromise their values, compromise their product. And this was kind of like, again, pre-internet, where like subculture magazines, small format magazines that you found in cool bars and clubs and shops, fashion shops, music shops, record shops. And so we went to them, went to the client and said, look, we're going to destroy this subculture and magazine if we do that, but they do need funding. So how about we just take all the branding off and let's just essentially have like a pastiche of like maybe 20 of the shoot in there with some stuff that you might not put in like mainstream mags that, maybe a bit kind of like edgier. I mean, clients are really up for it. So I just remember doing stuff like that, and the clients are really up for it. Creatives are really up for it, and then yeah, like it just became really, really sort of interesting. So, and I think that has been. I think you're exactly right with that kind of inflection and insight. Is I've really enjoyed behavioral science to challenge people's kind of preconceptions, especially I have kind of like something I rally against quite a lot, which is kind of like the alpha white male 50-year-old financial services executive that's seen it all, who knows it all. They can't be told anything different because they're the highest paid person. And I've really, really enjoyed behavioral science in that environment, especially as I've got older. Like, I think you get to a certain point in your career where, certainly I've felt, where you might feel financially secure, at home you've provided and you're kind of in a good place. You don't have to worry about kind of like losing that provision for your family. You've got experience and stuff, and you've got an opinion, and you know who your authentic self is. And so, yeah, I've really reveled in that. So it's not like I'm going to be kind of arrogant or overconfident. It's just like, just saying things like, they'd say something like, well, that's not how it works. And you go, well, how do you know that. And and so I think you're exactly right. It's like, I think the behavioral science environment is having an empiricism and an evidence base to experiment and prove that something works. It might be the outlier and non-replicable, who knows? But at least there's some rigor to it. And I think going back to the advertising, while some of it was empirical, that was a bit that was missing for me. So I did it for 25 years. It was brilliant. I always say it was creative, it was chaotic, it was sex, drugs, rock and roll. It was all of those things. And it was an amazing time, an amazing place. But I did have this yearning, which was, there was a lot of, I always sort of say, it's full of like very tall, handsome, charismatic sort of men, women. And yeah, I'm not either of those three. I'm not tall, I'm not particularly charismatic, and not particularly handsome, kind of fairly average. So I was like, actually, I need to have another kind of support mechanism and scaffolding, and that's where behavioral science came in. And I think it brought together those two worlds, which was counterintuitive creativity underpinned with science, and that for me was like, okay, I'm going to say goodbye to my advertising career, and actually I'm going to try and pivot into this world.
There's so many things in there I want to pull on. The first one,
Yeah.
I want to talk, do you think clients you talked about, hey, we're going to try this pastiche of things in an underground magazine, and clients being relatively up for that. Do you think clients were more up for weirder things pre-internet, we measure everything, we've got all these unit economics?
Yeah, I mean, I think it differed by sector and organization. When you've got kind of like, we've done, when you work with like a retailer that is part of the community, whose founder is someone that's grown, it's part of that kind of state or county, or like, of course they're not going to be risk takers. But yeah, I do feel like if you think about like culture more broadly, going back to maybe like, I do think like musicians and artists and filmmakers, they were taking far bigger risks, I think. Yeah, I sense that, I mean, I'm not maybe as close to some of those things now, maybe because I'm just a bit older, but I do sense that yeah, there was definitely some crazy sort of stuff that goes out. And it's kind of like, I was listening to Scott Galloway recently, and he was lamenting kind of like, I mean, I don't drink alcohol anymore, and I drank a lot when I was in advertising, and but he was saying like, actually socializing alcohol and making mistakes, and it's kind of that. But I do think that yeah, I think culture's changed, like for the better in lots of ways as well, by the way. But I think so I think that 70s, 80s, 90s was kind of like a blend of kind of a few different things. And so I'm not one of those people that says, oh, it was great in the past and it's not good now, because I think the world is a lot better in lots and lots of ways. Really, really do. It's more progressive, it's more welcoming, it's more equitable than it ever was, it's more accessible, it's more social mobility. Of course it's difficult. So I think there's really, really lots and lots of things. But yeah, I do think sometimes yeah, some of those things, and there's some awful things that happened in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, like culturally pretty bad, so yeah, so I'm not that, but I do sense, yeah, there was a little bit more risk taking, and that was most probably fueled by the culture, I think. So yeah, I think net we're in a far better place now. But then I think there was an opportunity for you to be a bit less conspicuous and a bit less exposed, because you could do things in like the UK that wouldn't be exposed in America, whereas now you do something anywhere, and people have got it, and it goes. So the risk
instantaneously exposed to everything, everywhere, all of the time.
Yeah, I guess that's it. Yeah, and and like I said, people have got reputations and provision they need to protect and stuff. So that risk taking is most probably kind of restrained, and also you understand it's in context, isn't it? So if you do something in a particular culture, in a particular place, it makes sense. But when it's transported somewhere else, it is the wrong thing to have done. And again, that happens a bit more. But I mean, I actually, I think in music, film, and maybe art, I think it was a bit crazier then, but yeah, maybe with a few more substances. I don't know.
Talk to me about, I mean, you've taken your own risks. So, you were at BBH and then you went to Publicis
Yeah,
and then you this was the first time you sort of struck out on your own when you went to, you did
yeah,
EGS.
yeah, yeah,
What was that like? What brought you to that point where, because at this point you're quite a ways into your career. You've had
yeah,
a good long period of success. What was the
yeah,
decision to do your own thing like for you and what went into that?
yeah. I mean, these are brilliant questions, Matt. So thank you very much, because like this is kind of most probably one of the best podcasts I've ever had in the interview. It's really nice, because it's just very authentic. Yeah, I think I I got to an age, I think, and whether you believe in the 10 years, 10,000 hours, but I'm like 36, I think. I've kind of had a few years of trying to understand how the world works outside of sort of academic, a young sort of high school and university, and then been in the world of work 10 years, and it was work hard, play hard, definitely, and then I guess it was maybe like a 10-year, 10,000 hours type thing where I'd had some form of mastery in something, and I felt confident enough, not by myself. It has to be said, not by myself. I think that's definitely been learning. But you know, I guess I had some bosses at the time that, when when you have people that are managing pretty badly, telling you that you've got to improve on some things that they do badly themselves, it's quite kind of revealing. Especially like it when it's kind of like inspiration, performance management. So it's not about project management or executional technical skills, which literally they're very good at. It's more about how do you inspire people to go on to do better things rather than just being their boss and being old, or how do you really celebrate strength and diversity to get the best out of people. How do you have more kind of servant-led leadership rather than kind of hierarchical leadership, all that sort of stuff. So I think there was quite a bit of that, because the world was very different then. It was very much kind of, like I said, it was kind of some of the echoes of stuff I said before. It was quite male, very hierarchical, and it was kind of, I suppose, explainable, some of it not excusable. So I think that was it. But one of the things that I think I really really knew then, and I do believe it now, and obviously 1 n=1, and I think it's true of behavioral science, that I think when people talk about a behavioral scientist, they often talk about a behavioral scientist as like one person that's fully rounded that can practice behavioral science by themselves, and I fundamentally disagree. I think you can do that, but I don't think you are anywhere near as good, and as kind of a small team. And so when we formed that business, it was a partnership with a trust for employees. So it's a really good structure. It was like 30-30-30-10 on shareholding. And generally, when you've got those three in a partnership, 2 out of 3 generally make a good decision. The other one can be a bit more provocative or disagree. And then we had 10%, which we gave away as trust to when we sold the company. So it's actually a really, really good structure of a company. And we had Pete, who was more maverick, very much entrepreneurial. Will, who I've worked with for 30 years, is with me at Carey, who essentially is kind of the opposite of me. He's kind of like got a really, really cautious risk profile, very blue on discovery insights, if you believe that, very methodical. And I'm a bit more, I suppose, more activational from strength. I've done Gallup Find. I really liked it, starting off new things, high appetite for risk, but with an understanding that I needed people around me that didn't, because then you get to better decisions. So we had a really good run for about 2.5 years. And then someone came to buy us after 2.5 years, and we couldn't sell for tax reasons. We had to wait for 3, because then our shareholdings would become more tax kind of efficient. It was like an innovation scheme in the UK. And we were like, we can't really sell anyway, and we've only just started, and we're doing well. We don't need to sell. This was like August 2008, and this guy went, okay, fine. There weren't many companies doing what we were doing then. It was quite an industry space, and it was a far bigger, more creative company. We were a bit more econometric driven, anyway, August 2008, there was a bank that went bust in the UK called Northern Rock. There was a run on the bank which I'd never seen in my lifetime, where people were queuing outside the bank to get their money out physically. And everyone thought it was a bad bank and badly run, and actually they were just massively exposed to the great financial August 2008. And then October 2008, obviously around the world, but in the UK, famous Lehman Brothers cardboard box kind of moment. It was just really funny. We kind of rang the guy up and said, "Hey, we're wondering, you want to do that deal?" And he just laughed and said, "Yeah." He said, "I'm happy to do the deal." He said, "But I was stuck with me." He said, "The suitcase isn't as big as it was in August," and we were like, "Fine." And we got about 80 to 85% of the value that he presented in August, and then we sold that business, and it was kind of a safe haven. Someone said to us some really good advice: something is better than nothing, and we just sort of cashed in because we might have been bankrupt in
Was there one of
the
the
next.
hardest things about
Didn't know, and but yeah,
one of the hardest things about
there you go.
you talked a little bit about picking these partners who are different than you, and you and I are
Yeah,
have very aligned views on how behavioral science is done. It's good when there is diversity because diversity is inherently good for
yeah,
science, right? We want those kinds of perspectives.
yeah,
Choosing founding partners is hard. Were you all aligned at the
yeah,
exit point? Did you all feel like, hey, it was time, or was there dissension? How did that conversation, like,
yeah,
how do you navigate conversations with, I mean, one of the reasons people run away from diversity is it does create difficult conversations, right? Because the motivations are different and the opinions are
yeah,
different. If you work with people just like you, there's no hard conversations. How did you have the hard conversation about it might be time?
yeah. I mean, I think, um, I mean, one of the things that I really enjoy about behavioral science and like is trying like at a personal level on an n equals one level, it kind of really, really helps you understand kind of like the the different dimensions and the different methodologies of the way that you make decisions. And so I really, really enjoy kind of being in a very emotional, heightened state where you're feeling things and they're very, very visceral. I really like that. And I often say to my team is to go like emotions are really good, like because emotions essentially are telling you something that's really, really, really important. And emotions aren't fixed; they're dynamic and they have many different dimensions. So you can and there's some like so I really like that, and I say to my team is don't run away from emotions, like don't try and neutralize emotions, don't try and dampen emotions, like feel the emotion because they're there for a good reason. And then the other one is obviously, and that lasts, right? but but when you complement that with talking to other people who aren't in the context that you're in, or when you've come to a more colder state, and then reflecting on things and some mechanisms about having conversations with yourself, or and those just distancing yourself from the problems. I think you get to like those balance integrated decisions where you've got anxiety but excitement, and you've got kind of rational and emotional, and I think that's what I've learned is that it's kind of most probably less about the person and how many people. It's just making sure that you've got a good blend of different decision making sort of processes, and you're kind of starting to filter through to go, well, the reason why I felt that was because I had a displacement from a bad meeting, and it was most probably flooding into the rest of the day. Because today I don't think like that. So it wasn't me feeling angry about that particular moment. I was feeling, and then you go, right, okay, so let's go back in and say, so I think that, I mean, in terms of that specific instance, I think we were fairly aligned. I mean, we were all of similar age, and I think we were fairly pragmatic. So, and going back to the structure, if you fundamentally agree in kind of a tripartite, usually it's two, it's two versus one, and as long as you believe in that methodology, then it's great, and I think that's why, I think having sort of three or four people, is better than two, or one. I really really think that in decision making, and then agree and commit, or disagree and commit. Like sometimes, like I had one yesterday where I didn't agree with the particular point of view, but other people did. So I'm like, okay, fine, I'll go with that. It's not my decision, but I'll commit to it. So yeah, so I think that is yeah, I really enjoyed that, and the other thing is I think like you're not always right all the time. Like you might have a point of view, you might think you're right, but other people get things right a lot of the time too. So sometimes, you know, there's a real blessing when you go, fundamentally disagree, and then you go, okay, fine, I'll go with it. And then it turns out to be an amazing decision that other people have made for you. Like that's got to be a good thing. And that's, yeah. And, you know, obviously, you know, you're in America. I've got some boys. One of my boys at college in America. Hopefully, going to watch him play tennis later. Another one's going to America, and like, you know, I do think like the politics in sort of America and the politics in the UK is kind of similar. And maybe it's like it's really interesting. As in, you know, we've got this very polarized view of the world. I think Alex Chesterfield wrote, you know, a lot of people obviously talk about that. But I'm more interested in that kind of centrist, like the grey areas. I think because it's harder. It's just harder. It's really easy to be extreme in your views, but I think actually it's more. I'll say more mature because that sounds like it's patronising, but I do like that point of difference and resolving it, you know, and yeah, sort of. So yeah, I like centrist and I like grey, because I think that's a true reflection of how the world works, and it's harder. It's really, really hard, yeah, and that's why, yeah, like, you know, some of the things that Trump is doing, I don't understand his motivations sometimes, but sometimes the outcomes might be good, you know. So like that causes me some consternation to go the methodology, and the man might not necessarily be kind of to my liking, but if the outcomes are good overall, as defined by broadly society, not just him, then, you know, so if the war stops in Ukraine, like that's a good thing, right? We might not like the methodology or the particular outcome, but ultimately, if it does stop, then that's good. You know, at what cost is the big question. But yeah, so I think that's what, again, bring it back to behavioral science, is that's people, and that's, you know, like we're so sophisticated, I think, and that's what makes it so interesting. So yeah, sorry, I went on a bit, but hopefully that was helpful.
No, I love it. I mean, so I am a unique American in that I grew up in a household where my father was a Republican and my mother was a Democrat. And so
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in a household where wildly divergent opinions were common, but
Yeah,
respectful and thoughtful. And I live in a state, so in the US, in some states, we have a lot more direct control over our laws. So a lot more things are
yeah,
ballot measures that you vote on directly versus, you know, you vote for a senator and your senator makes decisions for you. And so
yeah,
Oregon, where I grew up, is a very much a ballot measure state. Many of
yeah,
our laws, there is a popular vote on that law rather than
yeah,
representative vote on that law.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And so every year we had these fascinating gray conversations about the nuances of things. And like you, I think there is an element of behavioral science that, you know, behavioral science falls apart if we don't accept that there is at least some commonality between people, right? If we
yeah.
suggest that everybody is different and everybody's special and everybody's unique, then there's no opportunity to intervene because nothing will generalize, right? The way something affects you will never affect me in the same way. And so there is this neat
Agreed.
populist view of behavioral science for it to even work. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I think, yeah, we're obviously aligned on a lot of issues. Obviously, I said apology is, you know, and I mean, I feel like complicit, in some of the kind of more populist, homogeneous, kind of sensationalist kind of behavioral science, like in the early machinations and like 2011, you know, that type of time. And I've tried to kind of just reflect on a little bit to say, you know, was it wrong to talk about it in those ways, like irrationality, predictable and systematic, small change, big effects, and yeah, I think there was definitely some kind of hindsight, survivorship. There's all those sorts of things about kind of some of the case studies, but we did need to do something to capture somebody's imagination, you know. And if we basically said, look, it's really, really complex. There's really, really sort of systems at play. To get anything to work at all, it's got to be heterogeneous, and you know, it's like if we did all of that, then people would be like, okay, well, maybe I won't give you 10 minutes today then. And so I don't think it was wrong, but that's what I was saying earlier. I've really, really enjoyed the evolution, and that is science and scientific process. And, you know, there's you, Elena, Helen, and you, like, I really like it when you've got people coming in, like evolving and changing stuff. And for sure, there are some irrational, predictable, systematic, homogeneous kind of things that kind of feel like a default with a policy and a law that affects everybody with taxes or pensions in the UK. Like they kind of work, but they're really, really unique. And most of what we do now, I think, is actually more real, more authentic, and it's actually more exciting. So, and that's why I don't get so fazed by replication crisis. I like it. I like the rigor. But I think my view on replication is that I just think there were confounding factors that in these micro traces that, things that we weren't actually measuring within the respondent counts, or looking in the context that we still don't know. And I think some of it was wonky science, everlasting soup bowls and stuff like that, probably. But but I think there's some ones that you go, kind of see that, yeah, why it wouldn't replicate. But I kind of think there is something there, and I just think there's something else going on. And so priming, for example, people are like, God, yeah. And you go, yeah, there's some pretty goddamn awful priming experiments and some hyperbole around some of that stuff for sure. But some of it you sort of go, I don't know, like there must be something there. It does feel like, quite interesting. So, yeah, it's kind of like one of my favorite kind of evolutionary sites was I saw Julian Treasure do a TED talk about soundscapes, and I've got birds in the background. I'm outside now, and he was talking about, we find birdsong really reassuring and makes us feel safe because if the birds are around, predators aren't around. And like we've used that in like a pension video, like if people are feeling anxious about their future finances because they're not very good at it, and there's a lot of things get in the way, then let's just have some birdsong tweeting in the background. And like, have we done empirical evidence on soundscapes for the pension? Like, no, but it kind of feels like, well, why wouldn't you? Rather than having some, I sit in that side, I think. But yeah, I think, yeah, being in the household with a Democrat and a Republican, I think that's got to be a good thing. Yeah, and having I don't know what the right word is. I don't know what you think, Matt, but like not mature, because that suggests that people are immature if they don't have it, and I think that's right. Or intellectual, and people say they're unintellectual and intellectual. I don't think that. I think smart and cleverness comes in lots and lots of different forms. I don't think it's all kind of IQ and academic. And but yeah, I do like, and I think we've maybe lost a little bit of that, the ability to have those conversations. I think Paul Dolan is doing some good work from LSE in terms of with Steve Baker, who's a UK politician, and they've got very different views, and they've got a new consultancy where they've got very polarized views, but they're actively trying to have these conversations. But yeah, I like it when Alina, kind of just say, look, like qualitative behavioral science, some people are quite kind of like disparaging about that, and I'm like, why would you just discount that field because it's not what you like, so grey, complex, messy, misunderstood conversations, because that's where it all came from, going back to Tversky and Kahneman, Camara, Thaler, Cass, those sort of guys. Yeah.
Yeah, I think your point is well taken, especially about, that there are priming is a great example. I love this example, right? Because that there are sensationalist papers, that there are overstated effects, doesn't mean,
Yeah.
You can reject those without saying, and priming is not, like, that doesn't lead to the conclusion that priming all up doesn't matter, because like all context, that would be like saying that, like, no context matters. Well, obviously context matters. Like, obviously that Jez is doing this interview outside is affecting part of how he gives answers, right? Obviously we are in coordination with our environment. So, that that I can't, flash something and get you to walk down a hallway slower doesn't work. Doesn't mean that nothing in this entire realm is relevant.
Exactly. And may get onto it, but like, I think, with kind of like the rise of AI and how that's kind of allowing us to do and see things and understand things, or maybe not understand them, but have outcomes that are a bit more understandable. I think that's really, really interesting, I think, for our field. And I kind of I don't know how you feel, Matt. I mean, I've been through a few generations and rounds of kind of technology, um, and I've got a real strong point of view. Is that, I've really loved technology. I'm not brilliant at like coding, and but I've always felt that you can kind of like adopt kind of new ways of doing things that technology allows us to do. But I do feel like technology's always had this kind of like belief that the world is kind of like electronic, and the rise and rise of AI and positioning the brain as a computer. And there's a book, I think it was Alan Jasanoff, I think it was, called A Biological Mind. And for me, there's a few books that I really like. One is The Biological Mind, and yeah, he talks about that in the 50s when we had all these sci-fi movies, it was always about the brain was a computer, but that model has never really shifted. We've got mind and body being separate is kind of one, and mind driving body, and obviously we challenge that. But also this kind of like the brain as a computer, and I've seen it again and again and again play out. And that's kind of like actually a massive opportunity for behavioral science, is to say it isn't a computer. Like, people aren't computers; that they're kind of organisms, and the brain is an organ, and it sits within. So yeah, just to have neurons firing, which are kind of electrical, doesn't mean it's a computer. So that, I think that, like, training models utilizing behavioral science and understanding of behavioral science is going to be important, because as far as I understand, maybe more, or I've got limited knowledge, but like, everyone's scraping as much as they can data wise broadly from the internet. And I was reading some stuff from some ex-OpenAI guys to say, the internet's been scraped basically. So like, there isn't anything more apart from if we create more stuff. And obviously it's very, very Western and English speaking. So that's a massive fundamental flaw of all the models anyway. But yeah, I sort of go, it just lacks any understanding, I think, of behavioral, as some of behavioral science. So, we're going to train models to be homogenous and average. So everyone's going to have to look for difference and uniqueness, and we'll see this retraction. I'm seeing it now, where different models are sitting in different places, and they're going to have different, essentially, training data. And I think it's those people that really embrace the ability to go, okay, we've got a model which has been trained, but actually it's got this uniqueness, which has got BSI in it. And that's going to make this far, far more, we're using like behavioral intelligence, like far more behaviorally intelligent. It's not artificial intelligence, behaviorally intelligent. And we can do that because it's got this understanding about how people behave and what they do. So, yeah, I think that's what excites me, I think, about this next gen of behavioral science, that it's moved out of predictable, systematic, irrational, and homogeneous to like complex, heterogeneous, but bringing together a kind of like quite powerful technology. But also, if they let us, I mean, let's see, technology people often run away, don't they, and say basically they know everything about everything and they're clever and give me $1 billion, so let's see.
Yeah, I mean, I think your point is, well, I always try and explain it as probably, it's better poker, not perfect chess, right? People are not deterministic.
Yeah,
And it always seems like
yeah,
it's such a grim version of the world to think of people as deterministic, right? You
yeah,
know,
absolutely.
it feels, maybe this is appealing to the artist in both of us, but it feels like a very dry version of humanity to say, well, we're a computer and there's a set of inputs and a set of outputs, and if you manipulate the inputs, then the outputs do this thing, and it's all some grand equation. Feels like it's sort of misses some
Yeah,
of the ineffable,
yeah,
you know, magic of humanity. I was, Barry Schwartz was my undergraduate advisor, and I remember
yeah,
he and I having a discussion during a judgment decision making class about, even if it's true, even if humans actually are deterministic, very complex systems, but deterministic systems, it might be
yeah,
absolutely true, but functionally untrue. Meaning the system is so complex that if
yeah,
it was truly deterministic, it would appear at least somewhat probabilistic in a way that,
yeah.
who cares if it's perfectly deterministic? That's not a very fun version of the world. And why would you want to proceed under that notion?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I was, So we've done a bit of work in memory recently, and I was doing kind of like a deep dive into that. And I think there's some work that came out of Harvard, which I think is the best place, I think, for memory. And, it's kind of like, our brain doesn't remember things, as if it was like a video. It's got this episodic piece, but one of the brilliant things that it does is it breaks down it into like these constituent parts, and it can't reconstruct them end to end in perfect fashion. And that's why we get things wrong. But that's why it allows us to recreate things in different ways that allow us to kind of imagine and be creative. And that for me comes back to maybe that like that thing about biology, of like DNA, and kind of like how things kind of come together is random, and it's been randomized for a good reason, because it's survive and thrive. And I think that's what's true of humans, is that the way that we're wired are wired in a certain way that they unwire pretty frequently to create, not neuroplasticity, but like a different type of wiring. But that's what keeps us going, and that's why we've been particularly successful. So that's I think yeah, unfathomable, but that's what makes it so exciting. Yeah, I mean, I just go, people are weird. People are weird. I'm weird. You're weird, but that's good, right? Like, and that it is. It's just yeah, and yeah. I mean, even when you say like there's somebody that's really straight and normal, you go, well, they're not. They're really not.
Really.
And yeah, and that's let's celebrate that. Let's celebrate kind of like difference. And yeah, that I think, I said in like, when you pass through history, I think I think yeah, we're in a better place now for celebrating that and bringing things together. Doesn't always feel like that way sometimes, but yeah, we're in a good place there.
Yeah. Barry once said to me, try and imagine the rational man and then imagine being friends with them. You wouldn't really want to go to a party with the rational, like with Homo economicus. Like they would be
Yeah,
fairly boring, right? As sort of partners in the world, I think.
yeah, it is. It's and like, I've been very, very fortunate. Not early in my career. So after BBH, you went to Ogilvy, and that's when I worked with Rory, and we did. And like, I had such a great time at Ogilvy. I had most probably some of the challenging times in my career where I had some really, really high jeopardy moments, high anxiety and high pressure. But it was a big organization, and we were doing, they do big things. And but I got the opportunity to travel a lot more professionally. And I really like going back to what you were saying before about the similarities, but the difference. Like, so obviously I know some of the guests you've had on the show already, and quite a lot of them. And I really like the way that kind of like different cultures and different kind of people from different countries, they do kind of play to some stereotypes, and then they have these kind of very much kind of differences. And like, I really, obviously being British, I really like being British. And like, not British history. Obviously, there's some things in British history which maybe you go, could have done that slightly differently, maybe. And but I do like kind of London. I do like Britishness. I do like when people, I try and explain like, that was classic things about what British people mean when they say things, and we have or and so there's a book which I'm just starting to read, qualitative research, called Understanding English, and I'm late to it. A few of my friends have read it. It's qualitative research, and like when British people say this, they don't mean that, they mean this. And it's like, it couldn't be further from, and I know it's kind of it's a bit stereotypes and a bit kind of like well-trodden path, but I do like that. I do like that about kind of like America and India. And I was in Australia literally last week, and yeah, I love it. But I do love being sort of British being British too. Just talking about it's just, I know it's well trodden, but like, just talking about the weather is just it's just this thing, right? And yeah, and it's just part of who we are, and yeah, and it's because we're awkward and we don't know how to make conversation, and it's very safe ground. But it's just such a great thing to behold. And obviously I'm from Britain, I'm from British, and but you'd be the same for America. Like, everyone kind of loves kind of like who they are and where they're from. So yeah, and they're all different. But yeah,
Yeah, I remember
I have enjoyed that.
early on in my career. I remember I might have been in a journalism class or something. They submitted one of my stories for some award, and the reviewer came back and called it trite, and I was sad and I was a bit upset by that. And
Of
the
course,
teacher and my teacher said, Matt, don't be frustrated by that as a review, because if something's trite, if something has been said many times, it's probably because it's true, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
so,
yeah,
we're journalists, and you should celebrate the fact that you have stumbled on for yourself a truth that others have stumbled upon, and that's sort of convergent validity, and
yeah,
it
yeah, exactly.
it is an interesting balance too. We don't want, for example, being British to say, well, then Jez has to be exactly this way, right? We don't want to
No,
say deterministically because British, therefore this other thing.
yeah,
But at the
of
same time, it
course,
would be totally foolhardy to say, well, there's nothing about your experience as a white man in Britain that has informed who you are, and that some reasonable
of course,
correlations exist between those
yeah,
variables. Uh,
of course. Yeah,
it's
of course. Yeah. I mean, but if there's any, I mean, bring it back to behavioural science. We had a bit of an epiphany. It kind of hopefully kind of makes sense that we were about 8 people, I think, in London at Cowrie, and we were like, we had an ambition. We want to be one of the world's leading. I think there's bigger companies than ours. There's better companies that doing other things than ours. We're kind of in the mix. I think we're pretty up there. I'm very proud what the guys and we've achieved. But we had this kind of epiphany, which was if we want to be one of those, you can't have everyone from London, like, because then you'll be like London leading, so yeah. So one of the things like I am most proud of was kind of like we have like super actively and been very, very fortunate and lucky in London, because a lot of the behavioural science courses in London, people do come to London to study, and then it's very welcoming, so we can sponsor people, but it costs quite a bit of money, and it takes a lot of time for us to get like a license to sponsor people's visas. And my boys are trying to get into America. It's really hard to get into America. It's really hard to get into Australia. I had another boy, one of my young man now, but one of my boys wanted to go to Australia, and it was really difficult on visa. Whereas in London, it's more welcoming. And I'm really proud of the fact that, we've got people from like Peru, Colombia, Wisconsin, London, we've got like England, Scotland, Wales, and then we've got sort of French, we've got South African, Central African, Vietnam, Thailand, India, and then Estonia, Lithuania, Ukraine, Australia. And like, for me, that's been, I think, most probably, obviously, you have to start somewhere, right? And usually it's with people that come from your country. But I do think that sometimes behavioral scientists, like, I'm a behavioral scientist, like, of one, I can do it all. And you go, you can't, because there's better designers, there's better statisticians, better experimenters, but the other thing is, if you really, really want to embrace kind of different ways and models and cultures and rituals and artifacts and contexts and emotions and hierarchies and family constructs, social constructs, like, you need people from all around the world. And I think we did 100. Well, I think we did 143 projects last year in 18 countries, and I'm like, wow, like that for me is kind of combination of let's embrace AI, but then also as well, let's really, really start to build understanding, which is kind of truly kind of like diverse, based on the cross-cultural, more than global south, global north, because it feels like, I think it's more complex. And again, I'm super excited. I mean, I'm nearly 60 now, and so I'm not gonna ride off into the sunset just yet. And but I've really, really reveled in kind of learning about those early 70s, 80s, and 90s, about this kind of academic sort of get together that the guys had, which I didn't know much about. Really fortunate to kind of be involved, I guess, in kind of like activating, similar to you, Matt, kind of with kind of like an idea that would capture people's imaginations, got governments and got enterprises on board with. And then we then were humble enough and had the humility to say, we know it's not quite right. And we were constantly going to challenge each other to make it better. And then we got to more heterogeneity, complexity, contextual. And then now we're going into this area, which is cross-cultural and more kind of like, both complex and systems led through AI, you know, more generative, I guess, in terms of intervention. It's like super exciting. I really sort of enjoyed kind of the different sort of, different moments and stuff throughout it. Yeah.
You know, you're unique because you have been at this for so long and you've had such a great storied career. You were excited at the beginning. Do you think you're still excited? Are you still like, do you get up every day and think, wow, how cool is this to do behavioral science? You said you're not quite ready to run off to the sunset, to our great benefit. You know, I think Cowrie is very much a reflection in some ways of your own personality. And
Yeah.
you know, and I do think it has been such a great example for the world of like what this can look like
Yeah.
at scale. You know, are you sort of excited about the work yet to come, or is there a next act for you?
Yeah. No, I think I think the next act is kind of like generative AI. You know, it's kind of, we know that more dynamic intervention and more personalized in ethical and moral ways. So but yeah, so I think like the generative piece, I think, is really, really interesting, and as kind of like a co-pilot and an enabler, a facilitator for us to make decisions for ourselves. And again, there's fine lines, grey areas, as we said before, and you know, we society will dictate what that kind of looks like, and not always digital, but obviously there's going to be sort of more of that. So I'm really, really excited about that. I think because, you know, again, you know better than most, like, you know, finance and health and longevity, you know, we're living longer, we find it difficult to fund our financial futures, and we've got a lower quality of later life. I think sort of squaring the circle on some of those things, I think utilizing behavioral science would be good. So yes, I'm excited by that. I think there's some, you know, without getting into sort of non-behavioral science or politics, but yeah, I do think like wealth inequality is a big thing for me right now. You know, I've got children, like young men. I said an 18, 21 and 23-year-old. I came from, you know, I wasn't like super poor. I'm not doing a rags to riches story at all. I had a great childhood in the 70s. My dad was a teacher, and mum worked in the hospitals, and but you know, I think it was a lot easier to start out. You know, it was a lot easier to start out. It's still hard. You know, people still live with their parents and their partners, and before they saved up to get a flat and stuff like that, and on deposit. But you can't even do that now. So you know, if there was one conundrum, I think that behavioral science could kind of help solve, I think it would be kind of like how we get through this kind of shift, I think, of an older generation control of wealth and voting, and how that's reconciled versus next generation, because I do think that's looming quite big, because it's not fair. You know, you can't have young people paying taxes and working hard and not having the benefits of actually the people that benefit from them paying taxes in healthcare systems or states funded sort of retirement systems as well as their own. It's kind of like, wow. I mean, I'm not a boomer, you know, but it is you know, I'm an ex, and but yeah, I think that's one big thing I'd like to sort of solve, and or see behavioral science solve, which is kind of like, for sure, let's make sure that people have a better later quality of life, through better health and better outcomes, through better early life, but also kind of like younger people aren't paying for older people to have that lifestyle. It doesn't seem fair to me. But I sense there's a few voices sort of out there. You know, Scott Galloway, you know, I listen to him a lot. He's quite binary sometimes in his views. You know, one thing I disagree with him, which again goes back to what you were saying about deterministic, was he said something which was, you know, the taxation on entrepreneurs, like, you know, I benefited by that. And he's going, no entrepreneur set up a business by saying that I set this up for a lower taxation system. And I was like, I did actually. You know, my reconciliation was, do I want to work in a higher salary but higher tax environment, in a corporate environment, or do I want a chase and something exciting to be fulfilled by? So it was part of my mix, and it was quite high up. It wasn't number 1 or 2, I don't think, but it's certainly number 3. And yeah, but I do like some of his sort of commentary that's in the world. He says some things I disagree with too. So, but yeah, I think certainly sort of interested in as a voice in America right now. We've got another guy called Gary Stevenson, who is an ex-trader in the UK who's doing a similar thing. He's a bit younger than Scott Galloway. So yeah. Some of those problems, future finance, future health, wealth inequality. Like, come on, should all. I think we're pretty good on finance, pretty good on health, but if we can focus some of our brain power to solving that, because I think that's not fair.
Yeah, and particularly on the young part, there is not only a wealth differential, a wealth gap, but also a meaning gap, right? You and I have the luxury, having built careers and built, a reputation. We have a lot of meaning. We have a lot of opportunity for meaningful work, right? Because of social status and other kinds of things, where, there's a lot of 25-year-olds that, the only jobs on offer to them aren't particularly meaningful, right? They don't have much autonomy. They don't have any accountability. They just are sort of, executing on the orders of the people above them. And nobody really wants to work that way. I mean, people work and live to be able to be creative and autonomous and useful and thoughtful. And, to some of your earlier point about the humans as computers bit.
Yeah.
Sadly, a lot of young people are treated as if they're sort of garbage in, garbage out processors. And that is tough. I mean, that seems incredibly demoralizing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the axis of influence or sort of like axis of kind of behavior to change things are. But like, obviously we've got a business, we've got young people in it. And I've got children. Like, they're not children anymore. They're kind of young men. I'm very proud, and they're amazing guys. Like, I really, really do care. It's kind of like, sometimes it's kind of like, going back to maybe some of those sort of stereotypes talking about before, is like, I don't sit there as kind of like a leader in a behavioral science consultancy and, going, I'm personally fulfilled and I've got status and, created some value and financially sort of in a good place, not an amazing place. So it's not as if I can waltz around buying Rolls Royces. I never set the business up to do that. I would have worked in an investment bank if I wanted that. I just wanted to have a really interesting job and be secure. And but I do have children, like, and I do care, and it's just trying to create and have conversations and in organizations. Like, I always say, I'm never not surprised how good young people are. If anything, one of my kind of leadership traits, which I think is most probably is pushing and promoting people too far too high. That I think sometimes I've been a bit guilty of that. Is essentially maybe not giving people the support and just wanting them to see them to be so good, and maybe it's just been a bit too much for them at that point in their lives. And but so promoting people too early, giving people responsibility, with obviously with support. I mean, it's not as if you go, look, here's the challenge, off you go, come back to me in 2 months and find out the client didn't like it. It's not that, but it's more about, I believe in you. You can do this. Tell us what you need. And yes, sometimes, most of the time, that does work out. And but yeah, I saw again, going back to Scott Galloway, he was saying that he's frustrated with a lot of wealthy, elderly sort of Democrats right now. They're essentially disagreeing with kind of quite a lot that's going on in America, but they're okay. So they're not really causing much of a stir. They're like, actually, we've done quite well. So, like, so something's got to give, I think. And where that's in, like, company structures, company incentive schemes, and all that type of stuff. But yeah, it's tough. I mean, so we had options in our company, so people benefited from that. Not everybody, again, it's kind of just when you set these companies up, but we had that. But everyone participated in our kind of like event when we joined VCCP. So everyone that had been at the company benefited from a financial benefit that year, and then another one for like the contribution they made, and that was really good. We gave money away. Myself and Will, and you mentioned my business partner. That was kind of part of us. We didn't have to do that, and it wasn't life changing. But when we were that age, it happened to us. We got some money when our company was sold. It wasn't life changing, but it gave us kind of belief to go, there's some decent people out there. It was unexpected. And actually, you can kind of take that sentiment and do that too. Going back to like what motivates me, but definitely it was kind of like peer and professional fulfillment. I really like that. I think that's maybe come from my dad, because he was kind of like a teacher, and it was kind of getting recognition. So I think when people like you say amazing things, it's really, really nice if people say those things. That's reasonably why I did it, to go, are we any good? Yeah, other people say we're pretty good. Oh, that's good. So I think that's really fulfilling. Second thing is creating jobs in behavioural science. I mean, some people, I know they say, oh yeah, Jez says that. But honestly, Matt, what drove me was I could have had a highly paid job in advertising, and a lot of money at higher tax rate and been more secure. But I just love behavioural science. And I was like, if I can create a business that helps other people do this as much as I love it, then that's going to be great. So the only thing that really drives me is headcount. It's like, how many more jobs can I offer to people, and how many opportunities? So one of the things I've said to the guys at Cowrie is, I stole something from David Ogilvy, which was, he talks about Ogilvy being the teaching hospital of advertising. I said, I think Cowrie should be the teaching hospital of behavioural science. And by that is accessible, friendly, and always trying to give people a leg up. So if people want to get in contact with you on LinkedIn, give them half an hour of your time, and then, we take people in on work experience, or under the hood. We have summer schools, all because I know what it's like. If they just sort of say, well, I chatted to Jez, he's the CEO of this company, and then that might help them get a job. Or it might be they've got some work experience, and then that gets them a bigger work experience. Or they do an internship and they know that it's not right, the private sector, so they go and work for BIT, like that, so and that's true, because I do believe in social mobility, and I do believe in young people, and giving them chances. And then, financially, never said that, I needed something as well to get to a better place. But I think in terms of building the capability, and I think we've now got some really, really we've got some really good leaders, I think. Like B-Way, Gonzalo at B-Way, amazing what they're doing in Latin America. Yourself, you tend to go in bigger organizations and kind of lead from the front. But Stephen Wendell, doing all his work has been amazing. And then Channing at Basara, and then looking at what those guys are now doing, BIT, with Liz Costa and Michael Holdsworth, Warder Malik, as with Will Mailer in Commonwealth Bank, there's some amazing people in behavioural science, and they've always got the best interest at heart. It's like, let's make the discipline better, let's make it bigger, and let's get more people sort of in it. So I'm not going anywhere soon, and I'm really still excited about what it brings. I just should make sure the tech guys don't run away and say, which they always do, we've got behavioural science, we read Nudge. Or we read Predict to be Irrational. I mean, we do get that sometimes. It's like, okay.